I wanted to let you know that Hemingway will premiere on Monday, April 5th. That's the premiere. And it'll be on for 3 nights, the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th. So you don't want to miss it. And if you do, you can still catch it. We always repeat feeds too. And if you have Passport, you can watch it almost any time. So make sure you watch that. I also want to remind you that Studio Space, KEET-TV has created an art show, and it will premiere on Friday, April 2nd at 8:30 p.m. We're very excited about it. And it features 26 artists. And that's happening for 13 episodes every Friday at 8:30. So do catch that. And one more thing. In April, we're working on having a panel discussion about Hemingway. And right now, I think we have 4 or 5 panelists. Look for more information about that. As soon as everything's finalized, we'll post it on Keat's website, and I'll also do Instagram and share information with people. It looks like it's going to be a really good, intriguing discussion about Hemingway. I forget the author's name. She's up in Seattle. We have an author who talked about the women in Hemingway's life. She wrote a book and is an instructor up in Seattle. And we have Reggie Edmonds, who's going to be on next week, who's also a panelist, and a couple of other people across the country who are going to join us. And now I think that's it.
Yeah, so I have a little short video just about the Hemingway documentary, little preview. So I'm going to go ahead and share that. It might be a little choppy, so I'm hoping it's going to work okay, but we'll see what happens.
I hate the myth of Hemingway. It obscures the man.
His talent is stunning. He went against the grain.
It's hard to imagine a writer who hasn't been influenced by him.
In order to have something new to write, he had to have something new to live.
And he fell in love quite a few times.
He's complex and deeply flawed, but there he is. Hemingway, the man, is much more interesting than the myth.
Yeah, so that comes out April 5th, Katie? Is that premiere? Yeah, so definitely check that out. If you have PBS Passport, it's really awesome. You get access to so many PBS programs. I'm a huge fan. Anyway, I'll stop blabbering about it. So we'll pass it on to Elizabeth with Word Humboldt. Here we go.
Hi, folks. I'm Elizabeth Hassler. I'm with Word Humboldt and excited to be here. And so I have a workshop plan that I did share in the chat. If people want me to share it again, I can. But I also will screen share for now. Hold on. I actually do know how to do this, I promise. But the idea sort of, and partly because it's fun to say, but also because it's interesting to do, is taking the Hemingway out of Hemingway. And my thought is sort of, what the heck will we get? You know, and so that's sort of my opening question. I had the idea that, oh, I'm gonna stop sharing so that I can read the chat when I ask you this next question of like, who is Hemingway? And if people could describe him in the chat, and we'll see what we get from that. And don't swear unless you're Will Gibson, and nobody here is Will Gibson. If people are willing, if we could get sort of a sense of what our engagement with Hemingway is as a group. Because I think when he's like, you know, anytime you're like, oh, it's a really great American writer, and then sort of like, who is this person and who is he to us? If you don't want to put it in the chat, you can put it in your head. But this is sort of a question that I have when we talk about like taking the Hemingway out of Hemingway, like who is this guy and who is he to us? To me, he wrote some short stories that I really appreciate and value, and then there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of sort of murky, complicated feelings of like not knowing the work necessarily as well as I feel like I should, and also not knowing what to make of political impact. So I don't know if folks resonate with that or not, but I think that today we're focusing on blackout poetry, and blackout poetry can be helpful because so what it is you take like a pen and you scribble all over an existing text, or you can do it different ways. People can draw things, or I figured out a way to do it on Zoom or on the Google Doc that's not terribly messy. But because I know that if people got the physical kits, they, I think, have a Sharpie involved. And I was telling Corinne, like, oh my God, I could do terrible things with a Sharpie. Like, don't give me a Sharpie. That's awful. You know, I could destroy the world with a Sharpie. So it really makes me think about that, like blackout poetry in the act of doing it is sort of messy and tactile in a way that's kind of hard to replicate on Zoom. And also, you know, we're literally taking what we like and leaving the rest. I have some examples of blackout poems to show people. These are not Hemingway, but like I like these because it's like people are making pretty pictures. And this one is made out of the Declaration of Independence. So people who can see my screen are, you're literally seeing the shape of the original text in the what people make in the blacking out. This one is somebody who makes poems out of newspaper pieces mostly. So like this is a headline, and then the word is bigger in cicadas. And then, but it also, if it's the poem, then it becomes a way to talk about things that we emphasize or don't emphasize. Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you all that I'm not even following my plan correctly, right? But I think a lot of the time we don't think about poetry or about because like Hemingway's work is about canon, right? And about like very important old white men who are dead. And we don't think, or at least I don't think as a writer, about like transforming canonical works because they are so important. And so then there's a perception that I have as a reader and a writer and a person who's still learning about Hemingway's work, that like, oh, I can't touch it, you know. But then I think if we're doing the blackout poems, they do invite us to touch it and to really get deep in there. There's also, I wanted to mention eraser poems, which are like blackout poems, but usually don't rely on the physical shape of the existing text so much. So you can make your own shape out of it. And then there's found poems, which is using the original text of someone else or parts of it, but then arranging it however you want. So especially because we are online together, I wanted to give as many possible options for being 4 ways to transform. I think that's somebody who might. Did somebody have a question, or did they need to be muted?
I think they just need to be muted. It should be okay.
Okay, cool. It's all good. but yeah, if you need to interrupt me, maybe yell my name or something. Anyway, but because sometimes interrupting me is important because I get too excited to have the mic. So I think there's a lot of different ways to play with the text that Hemingway or anyone else offers us. And so like the focus is mostly on Blackout poems today, but I wanted to, that there are these other similar forms that might be more accessible for people or open up different ways to try. And then so next I wanted to show you one that I did. First, I'm gonna read these paragraphs from The Old Man and the Sea, and then I'm gonna read my Blackout poem versions and talk a little bit about how that felt. Okay. So he did it. It was difficult in the dark, and once the fish made a surge that pulled him down on his face and made a cut below his eye. The blood ran down his cheek a little way, but it coagulated and dried before it reached his chin, and he worked his way back to the bow and rested against the wood. He adjusted the sack and carefully worked the line so that it came across a new part of his shoulders, and holding in, anchored with his shoulders, he carefully felt the pull of the fish and then felt with his hand the progress of the skiff through the water. I wonder what he made that lurch for, he thought. The wire must have slipped on the great hill of his back. Certainly his back cannot feel as badly as mine does, but he cannot pull the skiff forever, no matter how great he is. Now everything is cleared away that might make trouble, and I have a big reserve of line, all that a man can ask. And like when I read that, the language is so powerful and so much about embodiment and the ways that like a human relates to another living thing. And also I think that it's important when we talk about Hemingway to acknowledge that he's considered to be one of the most like concise, famous writers. So the idea is that he never wasted a word, right? So it's sort of interesting to think about what we're doing when we are taking away his words or clearing so many of them away to make something new. That's interesting to me. And I sort of wonder what we'll discover as we do that, and in my case, do that some more. So I think I made 2 pieces out of this, because it turns out, at least for me, that like one paragraph of the text was it was enough for a whole poem, basically. So I think these are 2 separate pieces that might be friends. So the fish pulled down his face, and a cut eye coagulated before the bow rested the wood. Carefully it came, holding, anchored. The fish felt water. And then I think this is a separate piece, but also you don't know, right, what the shape of something is gonna be before you do it sometimes. I wonder, the wire, the great hill, certainly cannot feel forever how everything is, make trouble of line, all that can ask. And I think that what I really connect to in the Hemingway pieces, and I think it's going to be different for everyone, but there's a lot of repetition in my work and in Hemingway's work. So I think that some of the ways that I chose to redact into my poem are about what I normally do. And then also some of the ways that I chose to make changes and to black out certain aspects were related to myself as a person. Like the line is all that a man can ask, and I am not a man. So that's why I chose to black out the part that says, so all that can ask, you know, and part of me is not sure what's there if you take a man out, not because I'm not a feminist, but just because I wonder what the other possibilities are if we're, you know, removing some of what might be Hemingway's assumptions, right? So the thing about today is that we don't have a lot of time together. So I do, how do people feel about attempting this for 15 minutes? Because I'm gonna try and make you do that, but it does seem mean.
Elizabeth,
yes.
I just want to make sure I'm understanding the blackout poetry concept. Basically, what you're doing when you're saying you're redacting it is you're kind of doing your own interpretation of the poem, and you can change it around how you like. Is that what basically?
Well, if you change it around, if you change it around to a different, to have things in a different order, sometimes that's called a found poem instead. And the blackout poem is usually specifically means that you like keep them in the same order, but you otherwise do whatever you want. Does that make sense? But we're doing both today. So I think whatever people come up with is super cool. Also, we have, I should probably share my screen again. We have the fill in the blank options. I can show you those too real quick. Yeah, and the, I have the, so if you're using Google Docs or I think a similar Word program, you can change it so that the highlight of the, so you have your text color here and you have your highlight color here, and you can change it so that your highlight color is the same color as your text, and it'll be blacked out. Does that make sense? But also people can, you know, however you want to get started is totally awesome. But then I just wanted to let people know that in the document there, and also in Corinne's email, because that's where I got them, is that and I think in the physical copies of the poetry kits, there are these fill in the blank options. And so we have from the age demanded, the age blank that we verb away our body part, you know. And so I'm excited to see whatever people come up with. I think this is a good time to try a little. Thank you so much for asking a question, by the way. Clarity is great, and I don't always provide it all by myself. So we are in this project together. Yeah, and then I'm gonna call on Daniel first afterwards. So however, we're gonna write for 15 minutes, and then I'm gonna call on Daniel first, so nobody has to go first except for Daniel. So everybody but Daniel can be happy about that. All right. And also, just because I'm thinking about what Crystal said, that Hemingway is, quote, a reference I hear always quoted and not yet known, have stood on lands where his image is placed. And so, okay, I believe in you. Get deep in that text. I'll stop talking for a little bit.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
if folks are ready to come back in about 2 minutes. And you can always keep writing, of course. Okay, great. If folks are ready to come back or listen to other people who might want to share, and folks can share anything, an idea or a reaction you had, or a line maybe that you liked, or a whole piece. And of course, nothing's going to be finished because, I mean, you might be, some people write very quickly, but most of us don't. So if you didn't get very far, that makes sense. And is I think a good sign of things to come.
And if you guys want, I can turn off the recording if you're feeling a little shy and don't want it recorded for posterity on YouTube forever. So I can pause the recording.
I think that might be good. I kind of want to put Daniel on the spot and make him be recorded because he's a host too. So
okay,
I don't know how you feel about that.
So I do something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Daniel, would you like to go first?
Sure. So how I went about this, though, I do want to mention that I mostly focused on forming sentences with my words. It might be a helpful tool for future Blackout poems. Just wanted to mention that. Anyways, I did for The Sun Also Rises. We called behind her door. I went up to the light. She turned around. Was an empty glass. I poured the half-full glass down the sink. I kicked my bed. I thought of her. I had last seen her in hell. Everything is another thing. That was all I got. But
I love that. It's very on brand for you. I feel like
angsty, yeah.
Some of us know each other from other writing spaces and workshops, luckily, because it's good to have friends. And I also just wanted, before maybe we turn the recording off, I did want to thank everybody who wrote in the chat when I asked people to write in the chat, and just that I didn't read everybody's aloud because I was overwhelmed with my screen sharing technology. But I think, because Mary, if you don't mind, I'll read yours for the recording. I don't know a lot about him, but the impressions I have of him include perhaps some of his writings reflect the times he lived through, including the Spanish Civil War. The 30s were a pretty amazing time in our country for politics. And I think it's just, and then Valerie, I think this is really important too, says someone we had to read in high school. and then somebody whose name I don't know how to pronounce it, Adventure World Traveler. So those are all really important things that ways that we as a group are thinking about it, and probably anybody who reads the recording might be thinking similar or other things. And then Todd says, a man who inspired other writers, musicians, and filmmakers, which I think is so important. And that includes us today, because we're all here doing this thing. And even if you didn't end up writing from Hemingway, I think being in the Hemingway workshop, you can therefore put in some kind of bio or something that you were inspired by Hemingway because you came here for some reason. So anyway, I just think that's really valuable to have our different impressions. And then I think we should probably turn the recording off now, just so that people feel